Well. So, Tulsi Gabbard, I see the Tulsi 2020 shirt. Tulsi Gabbard has officially resigned. I think it was yesterday, 2 days ago, from being director of national intelligence. And well, it was sad news. Sad news. It's understandable. Um, she always ran in this platform of being anti-war, of being anti-regime change, of having America be strong by investing in its people, not in you know regime change wars. And now, as she's been in such high position of power, she encounters this massive contradiction. As Trump first, small bombs thrown at fishing boats in Colombia, and then taking out Maduro in Venezuela, and of course then the big one, which is the Iran war. Officially, she talks about how her husband has uh, rare cancer. Hoping that that goes better, and that she has to stand by him. Understandable, very understandable. And really sad. It's sad for me to see her go. She's probably the best one in few of the good things that were in this administration, in the current U.S. administration with Donald Trump. There was Joe Kent. I also really like who now is gone. Tulsi, of course, and well, RFK Jr. is still there. So let's see. I know some of you maybe don't like him, but no, people get bad press for no reason at times. And at times it's true that some of the things he says is, but we all make mistakes. It happens. Tulsi, why I have this shirt too? Well, that's the thing. Is like I remember her from 2017, right after Obama left. There was this big commotion because the times of Bashar al-Assad. How there were some reports that he was gassing people. Then it turns out that those reports weren't true. The there was a big push for regime change in Syria, and that benefited different actors. Of course, Western interests, British interests there, Israel's interests, and also even Assad was a secular leader, and a lot of the Gulf, a lot of the Arab countries, theocratic monarchies there, did not like him because of that either. And then he also got along with other minorities, Shia minorities too. So of course that's gonna conflict. Especially when it comes to the higher echelons of power, the conflict between Sunni and Shia. And Assad giving support to the Shia groups, and then after them, him being secular. He made himself a lot of enemies in the West, in Israel, and in the Muslim world as well. So Tulsi Gabbard actually went to Syria back then, met with Assad, and then she came back and she gave these big interviews because Tulsi was an important figure. She wasn't just any regular congresswoman. She's a Iraq War veteran, active duty also at in the U.S. Army. So, and then at that time, the year before, she was the vice chair of the DNC, and she also had this attitude of always breaking away from what the norm was. At that point, the norm was Assad is bad, Syria gotta be taken down, and she was like, "Hold on, I just went there. That's not a good idea. We're actually supporting the wrong people there because the U.S. was financing rebel groups, and in some of those rebel groups, now you can theorize about different things, But in those rebel groups, there were a lot of members who were, radical Islamists, members of Al Nusra or former Al Qaeda members. So Tulsi was like, in Syria with Assad, Christians, Jews, they're all allowed to worship freely there, Um, women have more rights, all those things, because Assad was a secular leader. Brutal at times, but he didn't run his country with a certain theocratic, law. And well, she said, "Why are we taking out this person who's actually also fighting Al Qaeda, who's also fighting ISIS?" it's totally counterproductive. So she completely, and that's when I first knew of her, she completely, destroyed that narrative that was, always fed to us through the mass media, through the government, whether it was Obama or whether it was Trump. Um, Now, the year before that, when she was vice chair of the DNC, she broke away also from party rule because she said, no, I don't want to nominate Hillary Clinton. I will give my support, standing as DNC vice chair, to Bernie Sanders. So she was this rebellious figure, who seemed like always went for the right thing. And that's something that I really adored about her character and about her way of doing things. Unfortunately, I feel that's the reason why of her demise and her, I guess you can say, conversion to the dark side, because later on she ran for president, and the media and her own party made her life miserable. The own left, many other voices on the left who talk about, being anti-war, talk about, corruption and all that stuff, made her life miserable for various reasons, I think that the fact that she was very straightforward, the fact I feel that she's also a very good-looking woman, and with so many favorable characteristics, made a lot of people jealous. Made a lot of people jealous, and when people get jealous, people tend to spew more hate on you, and that's exactly what happened with Tulsi. And then when you also go against the narrative, against the established power, well, people are also gonna spew a lot of hate on you too. And she never really had away, powerful allies. She was put in position of power as DNC vice chair, as congresswoman, because woman of color, in a liberal aisle of the Democratic Party, with war veteran, good looking, intelligent, she knows her stuff. So she was the ideal candidate to, manipulate. But instead, she was someone who went her own way, and of course that made a lot of people crazy upset. And then, also from the liberal left, because of her, she belongs to this branch, some call it a cult, of American Hinduism. She's a I can't remember his name exactly, but she's a disciple of this guy. She was also raised in a conservative household. Her parents, her father. So, when she was younger, I guess they published some things about her and about her dad. Being homophobic. Whatever, because that's kind of where she comes from, her background. So then, when she was running for, the more that she gained reputation, and then eventually in 2019, when she decides to be a candidate for president, they bring this up. They'd be like, hey, you have this homophobic past. So they pile that on her. Then of course, and that comes from, the liberal, the more liberal wing, the leftist wing of the party. And that's the thing that always just was very disappointing to see, because Tulsi was a winning candidate. She really was back in 2019, for the 2020 primaries. You're talking about a good-looking woman who has been in positions of, power, DNC vice chair, representative in Congress, war veteran. So she could really manage to have a broad appeal all across. And yet, I think that was also her biggest weakness. Or not weakness, but her Achilles tendon, her Achilles heel. Because that also meant that since she had a lot of potential, since she wasn't going to follow the narrative, she had to be put down. And that's exactly what happened. And that really disappointed her. And that is why then she decides to... She was also very into, like others, like Bernie Sanders went to Fox News in those years to, interview himself with former voters and whatever, town halls. Ro Khanna did the same thing. And she was one of those, prominent members of the Democratic Party who would appear on Fox News and, dialogue with people across the aisle. And a lot of the leftists criticized her for that. A lot of the liberals also, and um, Democrats criticized her for that. So in the end, I feel that is what triggered her to. I don't know if it's a sense of revenge or resentment, but it's like, you guys did made my life miserable, and I'm actually, because this is kind of what happened too. A lot of conservative, people who would listen to her were like, hey, this is a common sense person, because she really is. At least back then, they started being more welcoming to her than her own people, her own political people. So eventually, she starts to appeal more and more, mix herself more with the conservatives, and that is how, in the end, I feel that transformation from being a liberal Democrat into a member of the Trump cabinet happens. She always was against, they said so many bad things. Hillary Clinton called her a Russian spy, because she was, opposed to, having confrontations with Russia. She was always very anti-war. That's what I always appreciated from her. Very, upfront, always putting the right decisions, from breaking away from the establishment, supporting Bernie Sanders, to saying, hey, let's stop trying to, topple Assad. This is actually counterproductive, to, not falling for that Russiagate propaganda, to not wanting, wars with Russia, Ukraine, all that stuff. So that won her a lot of enemies in those party establishments who wanted those wars, those confrontations. So in the end, she grew disillusioned, and she goes to the Trump administration in the end, because she's like, well, the people here are actually willing to listen to me. They're actually considering me more than my own group, my own political people. And yeah, but I do think that also in the Trump administration, of course, with this whole flip, Trump really deceived everybody, like going all this, I don't want war with Iran, I'm gonna end, the war with Russia in a day, And Tulsi in the beginning of this year, was in a video saying, no, Iran does not have the capacity for a nuclear weapon. Having war with Iran would be a great, problem. It is true that she's a bit pro-Israel. It is true, and I think that arises a lot because of her conservative family's past. So I think that goes from there. And also her experience in the military, in the army, But she was always against having frontal, confrontation, a heated exchange with other countries, or because of other countries. And also another thing, in since she has a Hindu past, she's American Samoan, but Hindu family. There's that rivalry. She's also good friends with Modi, the Prime Minister of India. There's those allegations that there's a certain rivalry and disdain between the Modi administration and the Muslim population in India. So I guess maybe from there too, why she would be perhaps a bit suspicious about the Palestinians struggle and all that. It's like, and why she would side more with Israel. Because since she is a bit, I wouldn't say she's anti-Muslim, but she is in that environment, then of course she would see. You could make the theory that why she would see the Palestinian cause and all those things as antagonists, and why she would perceive Israel as something more friendly. But yeah, so then I do think that in the end, in the Trump administration, she wasn't being taken into consideration. She was actually being shut out from a lot of the important meetings. Hexed over there, and Joe Kent and Tulsi were actually the ones who were not, taken into account when those big decisions were made. Contrary to what is said, I don't think she has specifically bowed down to the Trump administration or to this war, or contradicted where she came from or that she was phony. No, what I think has happened is simply is that, you know, you're put into a position finally where you can make changes, and then you feel it's like I can only do so much. You don't want to leave because it's like, if I don't do it, who else is going to? But at the same time, it's understandable that people are gonna think and perceive it as like, oh, you have betrayed who you were, or maybe you weren't ever, you know, being genuine. It's a sad end. But yeah, good luck to blessings to Tulsi, and until the next time.